Revelation 3275. From the 29th and the 30th of September 1944. Clarification of contentious issues through instruments of God. Whoever is granted the grace to be able to enlighten people should not miss any opportunity, for receiving this grace also obliges him to use it. God has chosen him to be his representative on earth, to act as a bearer of truth against untruth and error, because these are extremely harmful for the soul, because its maturing is then called into question. Therefore he must always and constantly stand up for the truth, as soon as he has recognized it as such. But to learn to recognize it only requires a loving heart which constantly asks for the truth. For the eternal deity unites himself with a loving person and instructs him until he has penetrated the pure truth himself, and no human being can rob him of his conviction of it. Only then is he able to oppose divine knowledge to the knowledge of his fellow human beings. He is able to do this, and his work is exceedingly necessary, because untrue thinking must be corrected as irresponsible recklessness, and this is only possible on the part of a person who is in contact with the forces of light and truth. Therefore, anyone who has once established this bond will soon have knowledge at his disposal, and he should also pass this on, or the gift of grace will be taken away from him again. For God speaks through a human being to all. Therefore the bearer of truth must always regard himself as an instrument of God and eagerly endeavor to utilize his gained knowledge again, that is, to apply it as a contradiction as soon as a question is raised as an object of dispute and people cannot agree on it or are wrongly informed. Such an object of dispute, if left unresolved, can push thousands into wrong thinking. And then God himself meets people and instructs them according to their will for truth. He does this through a human being in order to make himself known to those who believe in him, or to give the unbelievers proof which, however, they may or may not accept as evidence. It must inevitably be a knower who teaches, for he alone can offer truth. And only he who is the recipient of strength from God can be knowledgeable. First of all, these are the beings of light in the spiritual kingdom who directly receive the strength from God, which is light and wisdom. They then pass it on to all beings who are willing and worthy of receiving it, both in the spiritual kingdom and on earth. And thus the right knowledge, the pure truth, will always emanate from God, thus it will originate from him. And the beings of God-directed will and thinking will always be permeated by this light and knowledge, and thus also the people on earth who, being in most intimate contact with God through actions of love and prayer, will receive spiritual knowledge from him directly or through his messengers. And you should listen to them if controversial questions are raised, for they alone will be able to answer truthfully. However, test your intellectual thinking seriously, but give preference to the thinking of the heart. The human being will never be able to completely clarify what he tries to fathom, purely intellectually by examining and pondering, but if he lets the voice of his heart speak, if he allows himself to be guided by his feelings, then he will come considerably closer to the truth, for God speaks through the heart. But in order to confirm what the heart of those who seriously strive for the truth proclaims, God obviously makes himself known through an instrument in order to help those who are willing to believe to recognize the truth. And through these instruments he provides information about controversial questions if the intellectual thinking has already moved too far away from the truth. And understandably these instruments must now be active for him by trying to spread in the world what they receive from the spiritual kingdom, directly from God or through his messengers. For this is their earthly task as soon as God has chosen them to serve as mediators between himself and people. It will never be God's will that humanity should walk in error, and he will constantly help it if it is unable to distinguish between truth and error itself. But truth only originates from God, and thus it can only be where God can be active, where loving activity allows for God's nearness and activity and the will for truth is present. To these God gives in abundance the most illuminating clarifications, and these you shall hear. Amen.